think of the spiritual exercises in kind of goofy terms, maybe so it's easier for you to understand, is I think of it in 4 weeks, so I think of it in baseball terms. So the first week, or getting to first base, is the hardest, right? We know 1 out of 3 at-bats is a base hit. So getting the first week is knowing that you're a loved sinner. And that's the hardest thing to know about God loving you despite what you've done wrong. The second week is following Christ, so you're making your way around the bag on second base there, and it's just, can I continue on this path? The third week is probably one of the most challenging. It's the passion, or it's the suffering. So now that I can follow, can I continue to suffer and be with Christ? And then the last one is rounding the bag to home, and that's knowing that you're loved in spite of the suffering and sin, and that you're being asked to do something greater. And it's kind of like rounding the bases there. If you can do all of that, you've lived a good life, you know. And I think that's the goal of our life, is to do it, and we do it in the context of a 1-month period.
The exercises have impacted me with regard to self-awareness, I think in many avenues, many opportunities, many ways. The first way in which it impacted me the most, and the question is also guided towards leadership, is knowing who I am and knowing who I am as a leader. The exercises call us to self-awareness, and I think Socrates says that a life not reflected on is a life not lived well. And I think the exercises helped me to reflect on my life, to see who I am, to understand where there are obstacles in my life and where there are deficiencies in my life, but also where there are graces. And in terms of leadership, I would argue that there are many forms of leadership, and that the exercises have helped me to understand who I am as a leader through a particular avenue. I think I am much more of a quiet leader, one who would inspire other people, one who would see the gifts and talents in those who I work with. And I think the exercises have helped me to reflect on those gifts, those graces, those talents that I have in terms of being a quiet leader, but also acknowledging the goodness and the gifts of other people within their lives.
So the thing about the exercises is it's a very intense time and a very self-reflected time, probably the most self-reflection I've ever done in my entire life, which is a great thing, and it's one of the great blessings of the exercises. So you really can spend time looking at your strengths and your weaknesses, and this notion of being self-critical. And so for me, the exercises just provided a time where I could go back throughout my life and become more aware. It's not that I wasn't aware, but you just become much more aware of your own strengths and weaknesses, and how God has been present in your life, and how your life has sort of played out, and how it has all been within God's plan. In my early life, I had a great deal of suffering, so for me it was just a time to sort of not necessarily relive that, but to be aware of the great blessings that brought to my life that I'm not sure I was as aware of before I made the exercises.
Indifference to me, the more I've read about Ignatius and his life, is that nothing is greater than anything else.
The concept of indifference in Ignatian spirituality and an Ignatian worldview is not what we typically think about with regard to indifference. Indifference in common parlance is that I just don't care. I am indifferent. I'm going to sit back and whatever happens, happens. But that's not what Ignatius meant in terms of indifference. For Ignatius and for Ignatian spirituality, indifference is being completely available for God.
The way I see indifference is trying to make use of what leads to joy in your life. And if something isn't leading you to joy in your life, then to discard it, to get rid of it.
The idea of Ignatian indifference is, to put it simple, is I will be constant in my relationship with God and my trust in God, regardless of what is going on in my life.
The concept of indifference is pretty dynamic. It's actually pretty difficult to understand. It's not that I am indifferent in a way of resignation. It's more I have two passions, and yet I'm knowing that I'm loved by God enough that I can select either one and know that it's not about which I choose, but how I respond through that. Right before I came to Loyola, entering this stage of Regency, I was in philosophy, and they asked me what I wanted to do. And I told my superiors, I was like, I really want to go back to Ecuador. That's really where my passion is to work with the kids of the street, shoeshine boys. And when I met with my superior, he said, actually, we would like you to look at 3 prep schools, one of them being Loyola Academy. And I remember feeling, you don't even know me. Like, you know my passion is Ecuador, South America. And I was very frustrated with that meeting, but later I went directly to prayer. And I sat for a while and, God, I'm angry or I'm frustrated or my superiors don't know me. And God's saying, did you not listen to your superiors saying the gifts and ways in which you can grow? I love you and you need to listen to this. And it gave me this ability for indifference, meaning not that I wanted to give up my passion of going to Ecuador, returning back, but rather that I could see myself anew in a different way. And I think that's really what indifference is, and that was the first lesson of God's of teaching me how to be indifferent, is not to give up passions or to resign or say, well, they're not going to let me do it, so I'm going to give up, but rather to say, this is an invitation, not a no. This is a yes, a new yes, not a no.
My role as a campus minister, I think for me, involves a lot of indifference. I think there are a lot of times where we're working with students. For example, they go on a Kairos, and you have a lot of hope for the kid making some dramatic change in their life. And if I get too emotionally tied to them being successful at that, I don't know how I would stay in the job I'm in, because a lot of kids, it's hard. They don't. It's really hard to make some of the changes that they're realizing they need to make. And so, do I love and care for them? Yes. Does my well-being and my emotional state hinge on their success? No, it doesn't. I trust that God is doing something great, even if I can't see that it's happening.